from Tel Aviv, I'm Calev Ben-David, and welcome to Jewish World Weekly on I-24 News. Each week, we focus on the latest news, issues, trends, and personalities concerning the diaspora, the global Jewish community. And we'll begin our program with our top 5 items from the Jewish world, presented by Nicole Tzedek. Nicole?
Calev, here are the top 5 items from the Jewish world this week. A senior Biden administration official says Israeli Minister of Diaspora Affairs, Amichai Shikli, quote, does not understand the American Jewish diaspora after Shikli appeared to make an obscene gesture towards protesters at New York's Celebrate Israel parade. Kosovo officially adopts the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism, which includes unreasonable criticism of Israel, becoming one of the few Muslim-majority nations to do so. Former U.S. President Donald Trump celebrates his granddaughter, Arabella Kushner's bat mitzvah in Miami, just days before his arraignment at the city's federal courthouse on charges relating to his alleged mishandling of classified government documents. George Soros hands control of his multi-billion-dollar Open Society philanthropic organization to his son, Alex, saying the 37-year-old has earned it and is, quote, more political than him. 2 Broadway shows dealing with anti-Semitism score big at the Tony Awards. Parade, a musical depiction of the Leo Frank case, wins Best Revival of a Musical, and Leopoldstadt, which is about the fate of an Austrian Jewish family in the Holocaust, is cited as Best Play. Back to you, Calev.
Thanks, Nicole. Founded in 1906, the American Jewish Committee, or AJC, which advocates for the civil rights of Jews and others, is one of the oldest and most prominent diaspora Jewish organizations. The AJC recently held its global forum here in Tel Aviv at a challenging time for Jewish communities, facing a surge of anti-Semitism and divergent views when it comes to the Israel-diaspora relationship. Our correspondent Ariel Levin-Waldman was at the AJC Global Forum and filed this report.
The big topics are: how can the Jewish state maintain its relations with the diaspora, given that we are seeing some, well, to many people, worrying trends in the Western world? We have a large plurality of Jews that no longer see Israel as a critical part of the Jewish identity, and that could have serious political ramifications when it comes down to American support for Israel.
There's a lot of advocacy work which AJC pushes. In those advocacy efforts, we speak in colleges. You mentioned colleges. This is indeed a challenge. Sometimes there are criticism. There's sometimes difference of opinions between the U.S. and Israel, and this is not something new, but the strategic relations, of course, are critically important.
The issues are, of course, not just a matter of the cultural ones. There's also very much the security ones, both inside European nations and outside of them. There's always the talk of the rising threat of anti-Semitism.
And I think one of the problems we had in Europe is that early on, in the beginning of the years of 2000, in particular, there was a huge denial. And I think we wasted many years by not acting and by not being sufficiently strong in anti-Semitism. European governments have woken up, and it's a fantastic thing, but it takes time. And so for the actions to actually have an impact, for things to actually change, there needs to be a commitment, there needs to be money, and it needs to be on the priority list.
All these and more are the topics in discussion at the committee, and how Israel can relate to nations around the world to help solve these thorny issues that are challenging everyone today.
Now, one Jewish community facing an immediate and ongoing physical threat to its survival is that of Ukraine, especially those living in the southeast Syrian region of Kherson, following the collapse there of the Kakhovka Dam on the Dnieper River. The massive flooding in the area has forced the evacuation of residents while they remain under Russian artillery and air fire. Jewish organizations such as the Joint Distribution Committee and Chabad have joined in the rescue effort, as has the chief rabbi of Ukraine, Moshe Osman, who himself came under fire in Kherson. Here's my conversation with him shortly after he returned to Kyiv about the situation in the flood zone. Rabbi Moshe Osman, thank you for joining us on I-24 News. Let me first of all just ask you about your mission to Kherson. What was it you went down there for?
My mission was to bring the people. We brought the humanitarian aid, water, clear water, food, clothes, and another things. And we come out with the evacuation mission too, because people, thousands of people was in there. They need to be evacuated, and there in the place just walked a few evacuation groups, but it wasn't not enough. And I took from my friend the special car, Sherp. It's out road jeep. And amphibia, he can float by in water, and we brought with us it and boats, and we after that we gave a humanitarian aid for distributed for people, needy people. We went to the water, and where there I was in the Sherp, and I float by him, and the Russian artillery began shooting of us. And it was a miracle. I would like to thank for God that the first explosion was near us, few meters from us. But Baruch Hashem, bless the God, it was in the water. And after this, we come back to land. They begin to shot us strong, many shot us. You saw it, but you sure you saw it in the video.
Give me just a sense of this, the devastation. We've seen, of course, the pictures, the photos, the footage of that area, that flooding area. Just your personal impression, just how bad it is, how bad it's going to get.
It's very bad. It's a real ecological I don't know, crisis. Because it's many problems. It's hundreds of thousands of people live in their area, and the water. It's not only flooding. Because after flooding it's maybe an epidemic. They don't have water.
Let me ask you. Of course, all the people of that Kherson region deserve aid, deserve to be relocated. But let's focus a little on the Jewish community there. There are Jewish organizations working to not just bring them aid, maybe to relocate them, at least for the time being, to a safer ground, safer area.
You know, this raid we evacuated few Jewish old men from there to Anatevka, to our Jewish settlement near the Kiev. We evacuated with us, but many of them old people, they doesn't want to evacuate. I don't know. And it's the same thing we have here in Kiev. But their synagogue walked it, and the rabbi come there, Rabbi Wolf, and it's not so many Jews there, but it's most of them older people that doesn't want to leave their homes.
Just looking forward, you're going on another mission there. Tell us about what you hope to accomplish, given the scope of the situation. What is going to have to be done there?
I organize now the charity collect money, because we so many invest so much money. We organized to buy. We needed to buy. We received the machines, Israeli special machines to make water from air. It's Israeli technology. We just distribute few. Is what donation for us, and now we would like to buy more, and to buy the sherps, the evacuation cars, and we bring water, we bring clothes, food, and medicine.
Well, of course, we wish all the people of Ukraine, but especially those now living in the Kherson region, that terrible flooding area, we wish them all the best. Thank you for joining us, Rabbi Moshe Osman, Chief Rabbi of Ukraine, on Jewish World Weekly. Welcome back to Jewish World Weekly. The findings of a recent anti-defamation league of 10 European countries are concerning, showing that 1 in 4 Europeans hold extensive anti-Semitic attitudes, such as believing that Jews hold dual loyalty or that they wield too much economic power. Jewish life in Europe faces other challenges, such as the banning of kosher slaughter in some countries and in declining numbers due to assimilation and emigration, making it difficult sometimes to sustain viable Jewish communities. A study done just this year showed some 1.3 million Europeans defining themselves as Jews. That's only about 8% of the global Jewish population, compared to some 88% at the end of the 19th century. So this week on our Jewish Forum, we asked the question, is there a future for the Jews of Europe? And joining us, we have Melody Sukarevich. She is an expert on German-Israel relations. She's also a former foreign affairs advisor and spokesperson for Israel's former defense minister, Benny Gantz. She's in our Tel Aviv studio. We have Avital Grinberg. She is president of the European Union of Jewish Students. She's joining us this week from Tel Aviv. And we have Professor Emeritus Sergio Della Pergola. He's the former chairman of the Hebrew University's Harman Institute of Contemporary Jewry and an Italian-Israeli demographer and statistician joining us from Jerusalem. And Avital, I'm going to start with you, because if there is a future for the Jews of Europe, it really rests on the shoulders of young, committed European Jews like you and your contemporaries. So how do you see that future, or how confident are you about it?
Well, thank you very much for having me here. I am actually fairly confident about our future in Europe. We see, as much as we see all the negative things maybe in the media, we also see a very flourishing Jewish life, especially among the youth, that took it upon themselves to really unite their various values and identities to create a Jewish life that is meaningful to them in their home countries, all across Europe. And as much as anti-Semitism might be a threat, and might be even a part of the European Jewish identity, for better or for worse, it also makes a lot of Jewish communities truly resilient and active. And as the European Union of Jewish Students, we do believe in this flourishing and sustainable Jewish life that goes beyond the historically kind of like ingrained picture of the suffering Jew,
Right.
Because what is actually also ingrained is a survival mode. And in Europe, I think that our task is to look beyond that narrative and to show the public, whether it's the civic societies, the governments,
Right.
but also to Israel, that we are here to stay in Europe, and that we deserve the space for that.
Well, Professor Della Pergola, the confidence there for Avital, but you've written a lot about the declining demography of European Jewry. I mean, there is a point at which the numbers, certainly in certain areas, get too low to even sustain a viable Jewish community. There'll always be individuals there. How close, or how do you see this trend developing in the coming decades?
Well, the small numbers are really a problem at the local level, although if you take data for entire countries like France or the United Kingdom, even if it is now out of the European Union, the numbers are still substantial. And there are several other cities in Europe with sufficient numbers to sustain a decent and sufficiently articulated Jewish life. But my point of view is that there will be Jews as long as there will be Europe. And I'm talking of political Europe. That is, as long as there is a democratic Europe, a pluralistic and tolerant Europe, there is a lot of space for Jewish communities to express themselves, including the differences that animate our Jewish life. And so this is not really a problem. There is a problem of low fertility. Families are very small, and I think the key to the future is to have at least one more baby. But in terms of the intellectual life, it is very valid and even expanding. And so the problem is really the capability of Europe as a political entity to sustain itself and to ensure the future of the Jewish minority and, of course, of others, because otherwise, if extremism and intolerance and violence prevail, as unfortunately we have instances of that, then it is very bad not only for the Jews, but for the whole European enterprise.
Right. Melody, I want to ask you, you're one of those Europeans who came, was raised, and have come to Israel, looking now back on Europe from here. You hear a lot of alarmism, certainly here in Israel, and concern about the future of European Jewry.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And not just since Corona, when anti-Semitism just started exploding. All of the surveys, all of the statistics. But what I do think is important to keep in mind is when we speak about the future of Europe's Jewry, is really how we frame this discussion. And there is, as Mr. De la Paga says, there is no future for Europe, certainly not for the democratic fabric of European societies with the rise of anti-Semitism that we're seeing now. So in one way or another, you can see anti-Semitism as a litmus test for the democratic resilience of European societies. And it's no secret that there is an erosion right now to democratic values, that we are seeing an incredible rise in tandem with anti-Semitism, of populism, of disinformation, of incitement, xenophobia, and all those democratic ills that no healthy society should be dealing with. So when we look at tackling the issue, we should really keep in mind that it's not just a Jewish problem. It is a general and a very serious problem, both on the political level and also on the civil society level and on the people level.
Right. I want to read our panelists a tweet that was put out just this week by the head of the ADL, Jonathan Greenblatt, who wrote, quote, "Heartbreaking to see the exodus of so many young Jewish families from Europe. This is a grim reminder that we need to push back against surging anti-Semitism here in America because hashtag it could happen here." Meaning happening in Europe. Avital, you see this as sort of sense of I mean, maybe conscious a little to your optimism, concern verging into pessimism about the situation in Europe.
Well, I mean, I would actually dare to rephrase also Jonathan Greenblatt's tweet and say that we also see an exodus from Israel to Europe. So as much as it's worth taking all these surveys very seriously, and yes, it is true. We know that among the youth, over 81% perceive anti-Semitism as a problem in Europe, and over 90% of young Jews experience online anti-Semitism or see it as a serious threat. But at the same time, what we see, especially in the student world and in the youth movements, is that there is a willingness to really stand up on campuses, stand up in the civic society, and be part of the dialogue, be part not just within the communities but also outside. Yeah.
Right. I just want to go to Professor Della Pergola, because you've also written, we've seen that when socioeconomic or political conditions, such as in Eastern Europe, become quite hard for the general population or Jews, it could really drive an immigration to the Jewish state now that it exists. I mean, looking at a place like Ukraine, how concerned should we be that we could see similar situations, even in countries, for example, like France, where we're seeing an uprise in immigration?
Well, I would suggest a lot of caution. I have done a lot of research on Aliyah, on Jewish immigration to Israel and to other countries. And my conclusion is perhaps disappointing, but I find that really the main determinant is socioeconomic and not so much anti-Semitism. That is, the people hate anti-Semitism and they suffer because of it, but still they adjust and they hope there will be a better day. On the other hand, unemployment and poverty these are real concerns for those who have families or even for individuals. And so the explanation of international migration of Jews is very substantially explained and related to socio-economic factors. This is true of the changing level of immigration from countries like France, from which you would suspect anti-Semitism and Islamic violence are the main determinants. But no, the correlation is very strong with socioeconomic indicators. And by the way, the same is true in Israel. In spite of wars, in spite of differences of views, the real determinant of staying or moving is the status of the economy. So on one hand, Israel has done pretty well over time. Of course, we have had the corona parenthesis, but we have re-emerged out of it. Europe has done less brilliantly. And in fact, many young have left. They go prevalently to Israel, but also to North America. And that's, of course, a factor of impoverishment for European Jewish communities.
Right. Well, Melody, you already outlined the problem quite well, or what the problem as you see it. But I guess the question is, what should the Jewish world, including organizations such as the U.S. Jewish organizations that have a lot of economic resources, the State of Israel, should be doing to help those Jews in Europe, those Jews who want to stick it out in Europe?
You just mentioned two really, really important keywords, Calev. Number one, the resources. Number two, action. What should they do? What we've seen until today for way too long is a total lack of prioritization of this issue, meaning especially when we look at European Jewish communities, the awareness is there, the threat level is there, people are suffering from anti-Semitism. But yet you don't have the kind of infrastructure established that knows how to fight the monster anti-Semitism is, and the many faces it's emerged over the decades. So as long as the resources that exist in the Jewish world are not properly allocated, as long as this infrastructure and a general strategy along with the United States communities is not established, as long as coordination and cooperation with the State of Israel and the Jewish world is not optimized, we won't see much more than all kinds of single initiatives, very well-intentioned, some of them more, some of them less effective, but the kind of big bang impact that you need against as humongous a problem on a socio-political, on a psychological level as anti-Semitism is, unfortunately, we won't see much change. Immigration will continue, suffering of European Jews will continue, and we keep worrying, and we all know that with worrying or with prayers, problems are not solved, they usually become bigger.
All right, well, we've heard both optimism, but definitely some words of caution and concern from this panel. I would like to thank all our panelists, Melody, Avital Greenberg, Professor Della Pergola. Thank you for joining us on Jewish World Weekly.
Thank you.
Welcome back to Jewish World Weekly. Before and during the Second World War, the Nazis looted valuable artworks from their rightful owners, first in Germany and then throughout Europe. Especially vulnerable were Jewish collectors, either forced to sell their artworks or just having them taken away as they were sent to their death. After the war, much of that art was never returned, ending up either sold on the open market, consigned to museums, and even hidden away for decades. In recent years, there has been renewed efforts to have that art returned to its Jewish owners or their heirs, or see them compensated for their losses. But the restitution issue is complicated and thorny. The original ownership of many works is difficult to prove or to determine, and many governments and museums are reluctant to give them up, even those that signed on to the Washington Principles for Art confiscated by the Nazis, in which they pledged to return artworks back to their pre-war owners. Now, recently, I had the chance to see one small piece of justice done in this regard, a ceremony at the residence of the Austrian ambassador to Israel, in which the Austrian government returned a painting by the 19th century artist Anton Romeko that had been taken by the Nazis from the Jewish journalist and collector Armin Reichman, who was later murdered in the camps. I spoke there with his granddaughter, Netta Rimon Palevsky, about retrieving part of her family heritage after so many years.
He had very broad education and cultural background and interest, and he became friends with a lot of artists, famous authors, artists, painters of that time, personal friend. So he became a collector of art, mainly paintings, but not only. And some of the art things he had were given to him as presents from the artists themselves, and some of them he used to buy in auctions. He used to trace artists that he thought would end up being great artists and buy their works. So he had a collection of art. The thing was that since he was very safe in these high circles, he felt safe enough to stay a bit too late. And when he finally, realized it was time to flee, it was too late. So what he did, first of all, he was trying to escape to him and my grandmother were trying to escape to the States. In the process of that, he sold some of the paintings for the money to escape, and some of them, of course, were taken by the Nazis. Because he had to present to the Nazi government a list of all the art things that he owned. So yeah, my grandfather and grandmother was sent to concentration camp in June 1942, and they were murdered just 6 days later. My lawyer at the time, Yoel Levy, traced one of them that was being presented for auction at the Dorotheum auction house. And then he found out there was another one at the Albertina. And there was a doubt which one of the two belonged to my grandfather. So there was a researcher who did a lot of work trying to work out, because apparently both paintings came from a suspicious Nazi background. It is a very, very exciting, a very emotional thing for me, because it's a kind of a closure, although again a very partial one, but it's very emotional. It feels like bringing it back home to the family.
Now, also representing Austria at that ceremony was Carolyn Edstadler, Austria's federal minister for the EU and Constitution. Afterwards, I spoke with Minister Edstadler about the restitution of Nazi-looted art and also about contemporary manifestations of anti-Semitism. It's an issue that she has been dealing with for years. Minister Edstadler, tell us a little more about today's event within the context of Austria's effort to return art that was looted.
What we did today is a symbol for many others, I guess. There was the restitution of a painting, you mentioned that already, to the family of Rimon Palevsky. Her grandfather had owned this picture and it was thrown away by the Nazis. And today we could give it back, physically give it back, bringing it back to the family. And it was a moving and very emotional small ceremony here at the residence of the Austrian ambassador in Israel. And I think it stands for so many other things we should do. We cannot make up the atrocities which happened and Austrian committed during the Nazi regime, but we can show that we changed and that we are putting a lot of efforts into reconciliation.
I want to move to the subject of anti-Semitism, which you have dealt with throughout your career. A recent survey by the Anti-Defamation League found that 1 in 4 Europeans hold some kind of anti-Semitic view of one or the other. How concerned are you? How concerned should the Jewish community of Europe be about this trend?
I can only say it's alarming that we saw, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic, skyrocketing incidences, that there was a real increase of anti-Semitic incidents in Austria, in Europe, but also worldwide. And that's something where we have to work against. We have to fight every form of anti-Semitism. And in Austria, I think we made it very visible how we can fight against it. It must be a bottom-up process also. We have to include the civil society.
Minister, anti-Semitism can take several forms. There's the more traditional form, which could be persecution against individual Jews or Jewish communities. But increasingly, we also see it manifest itself as extreme criticism of Israel, of the Jewish state, so extreme that it verges into racism and anti-Semitism. Now, Austria is one of some 40 countries that have adopted the so-called IRA definition of anti-Semitism, which does cover extreme criticism and double standards being held toward Israel as part of anti-Semitism. But there are many other countries, including some in Europe, that have not adopted this definition. Let's talk about the importance of maybe seeing that process move forward.
True, but we're working on that. And I can tell you already 2018, we drafted and adopted during the Austrian presidency in the Council of the European Union the IRA definition, and the definition, what do we have to fight if we fight against anti-Semitism. And it's already quite clear in the European Union. We have from the European Commission also the strategy, and every country of the European Union has to do a national strategy also. So not all of them are ready so far, but I think we can also be a role model as Austrians, and we are definitely front runners within the European Union.
Minister Edstadler, I wonder if I could ask you on a personal level, as an Austrian, your own feelings towards the trend we see, the surge in anti-Semitism.
Well, for me, it's something I started already as a child. And that was when we went to the synagogue with our professor in school. I met there Marco Feingold, and at that time he was already an old man in my eyes, aged over 80 years old, but he was such a vivid man, and he was such a positive man, and talking about his experiences. He survived three concentration camps, and that was the moment, at the age of I think 16, when I started to engage in the fight against anti-Semitism. And later on in my career I was a criminal judge, and I saw perpetrators who had the ideas to, all these really horrifying things which we also punish very hard in Austria if there is someone doing a Nazi agitation. And I talked to people, I brought them together also with the president of the synagogue. He died, by the way, at the age of 106 years, and I had the honor to speak at his funeral also. And when I came in politics, I realized that I can do a lot more than I did before, and that's why I'm really very engaged in this fight against anti-Semitism, and why I'm also trying to persuade other countries and members of the government of other countries to do more, because it concerns all of us. If Jews are under pressure, we are under pressure, and it never stops there.
Minister Carolyn Edstadler of Austria, thank you for joining us on Jewish World Weekly. Welcome back to Jewish World Weekly. Now, it's a little unusual for a museum commemorating a diaspora Jew to be established here in Israel, but maybe not when that Jew is Albert Einstein, the genius physicist Time magazine declared the most influential person of the 20th century. Last week, a cornerstone ceremony was held at the Givat Ram campus of the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, which Einstein helped to found and to which he bequeathed his personal papers, intellectual property, and rights to his name, for the establishment of the Einstein House, an institution dedicated to his life and legacy. Designed by acclaimed architect Daniel Libeskind, it will display his archives and other exhibits detailing his scientific achievements. One of the driving forces behind the establishment of the Einstein House is Ido Aharoni, the former Consul General of Israel to New York, and he joins us in studio. Ido, great to have you. I've been hearing talk for years, decades, of some kind of museum or institution dedicated to Einstein here. How did this initiative finally come to bear?
Well, the game changer is one person, and his name is Jose Mugrabi. Jose Mugrabi is a dear friend of mine. He's one of the most famous art collectors in the world. He owns the largest collection of Andy Warhol, for example. And Jose Mughrabi is a passionate Zionist, loves Israel, wants to help Israel in any way he can. And in 2017, we had a casual meeting in his office in New York, and I told him about my vision for Israel as a brand, and I told him about the opportunity to do something with the Einstein archives. And Mr. Mughrabi, who does not have a formal education, thought it would be a meaningful thing for the state of Israel, for Israel as a brand, for the Jewish people to be able to support the project. So he made a decision to underwrite the entire project, and the building will be named the Mary and Jose Mughrabi Building. So, you know, I've been pushing this for many, many years, but nothing really happened until that meeting with Mr. Mughrabi, who committed all the resources. And this is not a simple thing. This is a very significant donation. And I think that Mr. Mughrabi is building here a legacy that will last for generations.
All right, well, let's talk about that legacy, because Albert Einstein, it is interesting. He did help found the Hebrew University. He left it his papers and the rights to his name. But he only visited Israel once. He was, of course, born and raised in Germany. He spent his life in America. So why should he get a museum in Israel?
So the answer has a lot to do with Dr. Chaim Weizmann, a scientist himself, who really took the baton from Herzl. Herzl had a vision in 1902 to create the Jewish state as a bastion of science and knowledge production. And Chaim Weizmann recruited the famous Jew at the time, Albert Einstein. And Albert Einstein actively raised money for the Hebrew U, not only for the Hebrew U, by the way, he was also instrumental in the establishment of Technion, and he became the first chairman of the board, honorary chairman of the board, in 1925 when the university opened its doors. It's true that he's been here, he came to the land of Israel only once. In 1923, he came with Sigmund Freud and Martin Buber, and they broke ground. But when he died in 1955 and they opened his will, they discovered that his heart, his passion, always belonged to the Hebrew University and to the Zionist movement. He was a self-proclaimed devout Zionist.
Though he was offered the presidency of the State of Israel at one point, which he turned down.
Right. He wisely declined, and he said, I don't think it's appropriate for someone who's not a citizen to accept that position, and I think that that was a smart choice on his part. But Einstein was a Zionist. When you read his personal documents, it's clear. In fact, when he died, when he had the stroke in 1955, it was in the middle of him writing a speech for Israel's 7th birthday, which, like a page from Startup Nation, when you read that speech, he talks about Israel as a bastion of creativity, about Israel as a place that will produce conceptual products and so on. So Einstein's legacy is part of who we are, and I felt for many, many years that we need to celebrate the brand, because Einstein is synonymous with creativity and innovation. The brand proposition, the value proposition is inspiration. Einstein inspires, one of the most powerful brand names in the world, and it's time for us, Israel as a brand, to associate ourselves with someone who's part of our legacy.
Right. Now, certainly the Hebrew University has those papers of his tremendous theorems, and of course we'll deal with his scientific achievements, which are, of course, beyond magnitude. But he did have he was a Zionist, but his relationship with the Jewish state was a little ambivalent. He had political views, which even in his lifetime put him more on the left. Today, be on the certain far left. Would the museum deal with those aspects of his character?
Well, the museum will probably, look, I'm not part of the university, so I can't speak on their behalf, but I know that a big chunk of those 80,000 documents is not scientific. These are personal documents. You will have in the museum his personal record collection. People will be interested in knowing what kind of music Albert Einstein liked. Now, in terms of his politics, I would say he was a humanist, just like Theodor Herzl. Theodor Herzl didn't believe that we should even have an army. And I think that Einstein belonged to that school of thought. And at that time, this is way before the Holocaust, this is way before the Nazis came into power in Germany, it was, I think, a mainstream view among the Jews of Germany.
Right. Now, there was a groundbreaking ceremony. When could we expect to see the process completed so that the public will be able to go see the Einstein house?
So the president of the university, Professor Asher Cohen, who's done a phenomenal job working with the Mughrabi family, announced last night that this will be done in 2 years. Let's hope that they'll stick to the plan.
All right. Well, I think a lot of people, when it's done, are going to be very excited to come go see the Einstein house and learn about that connection that he had with Israel and the Jewish state and the Hebrew University that a lot of people may not even be aware of.
No doubt in my mind, it will become one of the biggest tourism attractions in Israel, if not the biggest.
Okay, Ido Aharoni, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
On Jewish World Weekly. And moving on June 12th, if she had survived the Holocaust and lived a long life, Anne Frank would have celebrated her 94th birthday. But 78 years after her death, the German-born, Dutch-raised teen is still very much with us as the emblematic figure of the Holocaust. Her relevance remains. Just in the past month, rock star Roger Waters was criticized for using her name and image in a stage show accused of having anti-Semitic elements. She is also the key figure of a new book titled My Friend Anne Frank, the memoir of Hannah Pick-Gosler, who was one of Anne's closest childhood friends from the moment they first met as young German Jewish refugees in Amsterdam in 1934 until the time the Frank family went into hiding from the Nazis. Now, the pair were briefly united in the Bergen-Belsen concentration camp shortly before Anne's death there. Pick-Gosler survived, emigrated to Israel, becoming a nurse and starting a family. She died in Jerusalem last year at 93. Before that, though, journalist and author Dina Kraft worked with Hannah in writing the story of her life and friendship with Anne. And Dina Kraft joins us now. Thank you for joining us. Of course, anybody who has read the Diary of Anne Frank knows the story of Hannah Pick-Gosler plays a big role in that. And she has been depicted in, for example, movies and TV shows. So I guess the main question is, what took her so long for her to tell her own story, and how did you get involved in helping her do that?
Sure. Well, I think she was always, on the one hand, she was traveling the world telling her story for decades. She was among the first people to actually go out as a Holocaust survivor and tell her story. At a time, there was, in 1957, Otto Frank sent her on on her first road trip, talking about Anna and the Holocaust and Israel. And at the time, hardly anybody was doing that. But I think she felt that she was telling her friend's story and her own story. But when I would talk to her about the book itself, she would say, "But who's going to read it? Who's going to be interested?" I think she'd be astounded by the amount of.
How did you meet her? Let's just.
So I met her back in about '98 when there was a slim young adults book that came out, a biography of her, which did tell her story, a part of her story. And that came out, and that's sort of what eventually led more recently to a Netflix film like that depicting her childhood. And then flash forward all these years later, somebody at Penguin Random House, the publisher there, heard of the film, read an article in the Times of London about her, and decided to pick up the phone and see if she would be interested in writing a memoir. And she was, and then they looked for someone who could write it with her.
Right. Now, let's just a little about her story, because she was a childhood friend of Anne Frank. She also had to go, she was deported, and she actually did meet up. She did not see her in hiding, right? She didn't, no. But she did actually meet up with her in Bergen-Belsen right at the very end of her life.
Yeah, it was extraordinary. I mean, Hannah went to Anna's house the day after Anna went to hiding. I call her Anna because I spent 3 months intensely interviewing her. Her name was really Anna. So she went to Anna's house, knocked on the door. She wasn't there. She, was completely confused why she wasn't there, and was told that the family had gone to Switzerland. So as friend by friend and teacher by teacher, that following fall was missing, in the classroom, and they were either missing because they were deported or because they went into hiding and nobody knew. At least she sort of had some sort of relief knowing that her best friend Anna was safe in what she thought was Switzerland. So she had this image of Anna safe in Switzerland. So when she's in the Bergen-Belsen camp, when she's in the concentration camp, and she hears on the other side of the fence, this other sub-camp next to hers, Anna Frank is alive and living, she's shocked because she thinks she's safe in Switzerland.
Right. And she did give her some food and tried to help her, but to no avail.
Yeah, I mean, it was actually illegal. It was forbidden to go to the fence between the two camps on pain of death. I mean, she was very brave. When she found out that Anna was there, she decided she had to go find her, although she could have been shot at any minute. She goes to the fence, she creeps up, she says very gently, "Hello, anyone there?" By chance, it was August van Pels, who was also in hiding with the Frank family, who says, "Oh," as if it was a casual thing, "you must be looking for Anna. I will come fetch her." And she brings Anna to the fence, and Anna is sort of a shadow of herself. She's broken. She's freezing cold. It's February 1945. She's starving. And her favorite feature was her wavy chestnut-colored hair, and now that was gone. That was shorn off, and she was wearing black and white prison garb. Hannah couldn't see her; they could only talk. There was straw in between the fence; they couldn't see each other. And Anna begs her for food, and Hannah, who has no food herself, says, "Yes, I will bring you some," not knowing how she will. Right. And she creeps back to her barracks, and really an extraordinary act, I think, of female solidarity. The other women in the barracks are so moved by these best friends reuniting and that Anna is starving that they cobble together what little they have into a little package. And Hannah comes the next night, throws this food over to Anna, and then here's this terrible wail.
Right.
It's someone has stolen the food from Anna's hands.
Oh, terrible. But of course, Hannah Pick-Gosler did survive Bergen-Belsen, unlike Anna Frank. She lived to 93, yes, only died last year. Just tell us how you felt about that. You heard her story. It's finally getting its own book, and unfortunately, she did not live to see this publication.
Yeah, I mean, Hannah was very self-effacing and kept saying, who's going to be interested in my story? And now, amazingly, lots of people are, obviously. So it's very sad that she's not here for this moment. But, she was getting older, and she was a very realistic person. Holocaust survivors are dying every day. And I think she understood the importance of her story, being captured in the pages of an actual book. And I think one of the powers of this book is it tells the story that Anna Frank did not get to tell, the story outside of the attic.
Right, and also her own story, amazingly, that she survived, came to Israel, started a family, and then made a new life for herself.
Yeah, and in the camps kept her little sister alive. Her sister was between the ages of 2.5 and 4 years old, and Hannah kept her sister alive. And her sister is alive today. Her name is Raleigh, and she is living in Petah Tikva.
All right, an inspiring story. The book is My Friend Anna Frank by Hannah Pick-Gosler, and co-written, is told to Dina Kraft, who is the opinion editor of the Haaretz English, we should mention as well. Dina, thank you for joining us
so much for having
on
me.
Jewish World Weekly.
Take care.
And thank you for joining us on Jewish World Weekly on I-24 News.